Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, everybody. Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us for Parent to Parent USA Coffee Talk. We hold one of these monthly, and this one was open to the public. So there's a lot of new faces on here and names that some that I recognize and some that I don't. So welcome. If you don't know what Parent to Parent USA is, we're a national nonprofit that supports parents of individuals with disabilities and special healthcare needs with peer-to-peer emotional support. We now have 35 statewide alliance members and a couple other partners in our team. And so if you have a family within your state that's looking for a match, please reach out to your parent to parent. You can always reach out to myself and I can connect you with that jurisdiction. As many of us on this call are parents ourselves. I am a parent of 2 boys with autism, and we all know that having a similar friend, partner, supporter in a similar situation is vital to our survival. And I'm really passionate about my job. I've been here for about 2 years. My other half is on this call with us as well. You see Lily Brown. We're both co-executives for Parent to Parent USA. And we also have one of our board members on board. I see Miss Candy Bush. So welcome. And it's great to see everybody's face. I miss humans so much. So people get tired of Zoom and burn out, but I don't. I'm not tired of it yet. I love it because I'm an extrovert and I miss this human interaction, if you will, even though it's through my computer screen. So today I wanted to introduce to you some special people who I've been working with. We put together a partnership earlier, gosh, it was probably December of this year, with our partner called PTC Therapeutics. And we have been doing a lot of social media and education for parents and providers. And this is our next endeavor to invite them to talk about genetics and talk about what a geneticist is and some of the projects that they're working on, and hopefully have an open discussion where it's interactive and you as parents or providers or staff can go ahead and ask them some questions. So there's 3 people on board with us today. Aadc Freitas, she's the Director of Global Patient Advocacy at PTC Therapeutics. And then her partners at Genome Medical, 2 geneticists, Danielle Lemke and Natalie Beck. And so Danielle's going to be presenting for Genome. Natalie's with us as well, and she'll be managing the chat box. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Aadc.
Thanks so much, Marcia. I am so thrilled to be here, everyone. So my name is Aadc Freitas. I work for PTC Therapeutics and Patient Advocacy. So we are a pharmaceutical company. I'll give you a quick overview of who we are and what we do. But for my background, I actually worked for NORD, the National Organization for Rare Disorders, for many years in the rare disease space, and then came over to industry about 5 years ago. So I work with patient advocacy groups. I work with patients, caregivers, and the broader rare disease community. And so it's my role to educate and empower these patients and caregivers. So we're thrilled to have this partnership with P2P. So we've never worked with P2P before. You guys are doing incredible things on a state-by-state basis. And there's a huge gap, right? There's a huge need for all these families. And so once we heard about P2P, we were so excited to partner and work on these programs together. And so we're going to talk about one of them today. And I'll go to the next slide, please. So a little bit about the agenda. I'll give a quick overview. Genome Medical is going to speak about their genetic counseling program, Genetics 101, provide some case examples, and then there's Q&A. This is very conversational, so feel free. The chat box is probably the easiest way to ask questions. I'll also provide my contact info. If you see something on our pipeline as a company, you have a question about, you have a family with a recent diagnosis, absolutely reach out to me. That is what I'm here for. So next slide, please. And next slide. Perfect. This is our forward-looking statement. Legally, we have to include this, being a pharmaceutical company, so all this fun stuff. Next slide, please. Great. So PTC is a really, really unique company. So we are a pharmaceutical company, as mentioned. We were founded over 20 years ago by our current CEO, Dr. Stu Peltz. So he is actually a scientist through and through. He is not a corporate big pharma businessman like you would expect. He actually discovered a treatment, potential treatment here in the US for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, Adolurin. It's currently under review right now at the FDA in the US and approved in EMEA and rest of world. So we are a growing company. When I came on 5 years ago, we had a couple hundred employees. Now we're at over 1,000 employees. We're unique. So we're a small family-oriented biotech. We don't have those big sky-rise buildings with fancy windows and a gym and a cafeteria. We are in the middle of nowhere in New Jersey, if anybody's familiar with South Plainfield. We have views of, Marsha's laughing because I told her this story too. We have views of Kohl's and Five Guys and Taco Bell. It's great, we love it. But we're a really unique biotech where we're just working on rare diseases. Next slide, please. So here's a little bit about our portfolio of programs. As I mentioned before, if there's something on here where you guys have other families, maybe with a recent diagnosis, or you hear something, please feel free to reach out. We're always happy to have that conversation. So here in the US, we have Emflaza, which is a corticosteroid approved for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And then these 3 other drugs are approved outside the US. And so we have multiple programs coming down the pipeline, including some really exciting gene therapy programs for Aadc Deficiency, which we'll talk more about today. Next slide, please. So who are we, right? What do I do working in the patient relations department? And so PTC is unique in a sense that we have a team of patient engagement staffers, essentially. So we are all field-based. This is what we do for a living. We travel to patient programs. We work one-on-one with patients and families. So we're truly committed to raising awareness of rare disorders, right? Often these families, we all know this being in the space, are incredibly isolated. They need to be heard, right? And for people at our organization, the scientists, you know, the janitorial staff, the admin staff, the finance staff, they need to hear from the community what they need, how they're doing. It really, really inspires us as a company. So we incorporate the patient voice to everything we do. So we have 3 teams here that work in patient relations. We have a neurology team, we have a gene therapy team, and then we have an ex-US team that works the rest of the world. Next slide, please. So how do we do what we do, right? That's a great question. And so we work closely with families and caregivers one-on-one. So it's always a reactive conversation. So they reach out to us and then we can have that conversation. We work a lot with patient advocacy organizations, just like P2P. So they can be umbrella organizations, they can be disease-specific organizations. We want to offer support and resources. And we always want to make sure that these resources are tailored to the community, because there's no sense in us developing them if you guys don't want them. So that's kind of what we're here for. We have a dedicated team, so we're not sales, we're not marketing, and we truly, truly value meeting with every patient and family. So we want to help families gain a better understanding of living with a rare disease and take that knowledge back to the team. And we've been successful over the last 20 years because of that deep commitment. We know for so many of these rare disease families, it's about the small moments and extending those small moments and small milestones. And we're in it for the long haul, and we're really, really excited for the future. Next slide, please. This is my information. That's my direct email. I know that was kind of a quick snapshot. I wanted to give as much time as possible to my friends at Gina Medical to share about our new genetic testing program. But please, please, please feel free if you ever have a question about our pipeline products or anything that's going on at PTC. I'm available 24/7. So feel free to shoot me a note, and I'll leave my cell phone number in the chat box as well, so you can text. So next, I am thrilled to share Natalie Beck. So she is a board certified genetic counselor. She has over 11 years of broad clinical experience in pediatric and adult genetics. So we work closely with Gina Medical on this amazing genetic testing program that's available for patients and families, and she'll share more about that. She's worked with patients in a variety of specialty clinics in newborn screening, and she's currently the lead genetic counselor for pediatric and rare disease services at Gina Medical. Thanks, Natalie, for joining us. Feel free to take it away.
Sally, thanks, Marcia. So Danielle and I are here from Gina Medical. We're super excited. We're going to tell you a lot more about Gina Medical. We're a national telehealth genetic medicine provider. So we'll kind of dive into all of those details. And we were excited to get involved with P2P as well as PTC, which is a lot of letters all at once. But we're really excited because as Danielle will dive in, we work with patients and families from all around the country with a variety of special medical needs and helping families navigate that journey, and might include genetic testing and kind of identifying different tests that might be available. And we'll dive in with some examples later, specifically about one really awesome test option through PTC that we're coordinating and offering the genetic counseling for. I'm going to proctor the chat box today, so you can either send a group chat, which the toggle on the bottom right will say to everyone, and I'm happy to collect questions and we'll go through them at the end. If you don't feel comfortable asking a public question, you can switch that toggle to me. My name's Natalie, and then I will collect all those questions and we will ask them kind of anonymously at the end. So I'm excited to introduce Danielle Lemke, my great colleague here at Gina Medical. She's also a board-certified genetic counselor with 9 years of experience counseling patients and families with a primary expertise in pediatric genetics. And she's previously worked in a specialty neurodevelopmental genetics clinic at Children's Hospital in Colorado before joining us. And she's really passionate about educating patients and families, so this was a perfect fit. So I'm gonna pass it to her and kind of be in the background for questions.
Thank you, Natalie, for that introduction. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk about what genetic counselors like Natalie and I do and what to expect with a genetic counseling appointment. So before we jump in, we do have a disclaimer to discuss. So I'm going to read this. This webinar constitutes general information about genetic testing and medical screening. This webinar does not offer or provide medical advice or diagnosis, and nothing in this webinar should be construed as medical advice or diagnosis. Do not rely on the information in this webinar to make medical management decisions. Please consult with a medical professional before making those decisions. Do not delay in seeking professional medical advice if you think you have a medical condition. Do not disregard professional medical advice based on any information received in this webinar. So as previously mentioned, I work for Gina Medical. Gina Medical is a virtual genetic clinic providing comprehensive telehealth services for genetics. We provide genetic services for individuals, but also for health systems and medical practices. Our goal is to ensure that all populations have access to genomic health data. And we are also innovative in digital health to help increase access to genetics by using technology and AI. We have over 60 clinicians averaging about 10 years of clinical experience. We provide services to all 50 states, and typically patients can be seen within 48 hours of when they are interested in scheduling a visit. Our clinicians specialize in a variety of areas, including pediatrics and/or rare disease, which will be the focus in today's webinar. But we also have experts specializing in cancer, cardiovascular, proactive genetic testing, reproductive genetics, and pharmacogenetics. At Gina Medical, everything we do revolves around the patient. We have a comprehensive care team that includes genetic counselors, medical geneticists, pharmacists, primary care physicians, and our care coordinators. We utilize a telegenomic platform to provide easy access to genetic expertise and services. This is particularly helpful for people living in rural locations without easy access to genetic clinics or genetic clinics that have a substantial wait time to get an appointment. We are able to offer phone or video consultations so that you can have your appointment wherever and whenever is most convenient for you. But let's dive in a little bit about who genetic counselors are and where genetic counselors come from. So a genetic counselor is an advanced trained medical professional who can help determine if there is a genetic condition in you or your family, what that genetic condition might be, the best way to test for it, and throughout all of this, assist with discussing medical management decisions, which may include to pursue genetic testing or not. And if you choose to pursue testing when the results are available, a genetic counselor helps explain the test results, what they mean, and the implications for your health and your child's health or any other family members. Now we'll review a couple key points about what to expect with a genetic counseling appointment. So what is genetic counseling? It's the process of helping people understand and adapt to the medical, psychological, and familial implications of the genetic contribution to disease. What that actually means in practice is genetic counseling is a discussion and information process with no pokes. We do not poke people. Genetic counselors are familiar with the common, but also rare genetic conditions. Rare is typically defined as less than 1 in 200,000 people, but we will discuss this a little bit more in a little bit. Some examples of rare pediatric conditions include metabolic conditions, which may be identified through newborn screening, neurologic conditions such as cerebral palsy or low muscle tone, birth defects such as cleft palate or having a hole in the heart, poor growth or skeletal disorders, learning disabilities or autism spectrum disorder, and inherited cardiac muscle or rhythm disease. So the main job of a genetic counselor is to translate complex medical terms into usable or helpful information. They provide assistance with decision-making and empower you to make those decisions. Genetic counseling can be completely independent of genetic testing. You are not required to proceed with genetic testing if you have a genetic counseling appointment, and sometimes genetic testing may not even be recommended at all, or particularly for you, as there might be a better person to start genetic testing with in the family. Genetic testing is a personal choice that involves consideration of multiple factors, such as personal comfort level with wanting or not wanting to know that information, family member considerations, and cost. Genetic counselors have cultural competency training and awareness, and they typically have access to interpreters. Of note, we as genetic counselors can't currently see families outside of the United States due to licensure restrictions, although there are some genetic counselors in Canada and in many other countries. A couple of additional tidbits regarding rare disease. In the United States, a rare disease is one that occurs in less than 1 in 200,000 people. This particular figure was used with the development of the Orphan Drug Act in the early 1980s. The Orphan Drug Act was set up to encourage the development of drugs or medications for rare diseases, since they were not really developed before the enactment of this drug act. The definition of rare disease varies worldwide. The European Union defines rare disease as affecting less than 1 in 2,000 people. In the United States, only a few types of rare diseases are tracked when a person is diagnosed with them. These include infectious disease, birth defects, and conditions from newborn screening, as well as cancers. So without a way to track diagnoses of rare disease, we don't have an exact number of how many rare diseases there actually are, but it is estimated of more than 7,000. And also how many people have these diagnoses, which is estimated at about 30 million people. Next. So for genetic counseling appointments, every genetic counseling service or clinic is different in their processes, but generally, this is the general flow. You will typically schedule or be scheduled with a genetic counselor and be asked to complete a survey or questionnaire ahead of time so that your genetic counselor can prepare for the visit. The duration of your appointment can be anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on who you are scheduled with, but how long you should be expected to meet with your genetic counselor should be communicated to you when you are making the appointment. During your session, your genetic counselor will tailor the appointment to you and your concerns, and together you will agree on goals for the session, discuss your personal and family history, review risk information and how the suspected condition or conditions are inherited, discuss options for testing and billing, review laws surrounding genetic discrimination, and plan for how results will be communicated to you if testing is ordered and pursued. After your appointment, you will typically receive a written summary of what was discussed in the plan going forward. When your test results are available, you are typically scheduled for a follow-up appointment, or your test results are sent to you, typically with a results letter, including any other information pertinent to your results or situation. So this could include a family letter to help inform relatives of the information, or clinical trial information for a specific condition. So now we're going to touch on some basic genetic information similar to what is typically covered in a genetic counseling session. So hence Genetics 101. Within our cells, we have tightly bound structures of DNA called chromosomes. A person should have 46 total chromosomes, 23 pairs. Half come from the mother and half come from the father. Little sections of the DNA are called genes. Genes are the information packets that go on to tell the body how to grow and develop, kind of like a blueprint. This means that a person should have 2 copies of every gene, one from the mother and one from the father. As you saw on the previous slide, the DNA is made up of letters A, T, G, and C. The order of the letters is important and specific to each particular gene, and a change to the code or the sequence of the letters has the potential to make a gene not work properly. A change could be as simple as one letter switched for another, or a change could involve a deletion of several letters. Either one can cause the gene not to work properly, which can affect function in the body. I like to explain this with a book analogy. If you think of your genetic information like a book, sequencing analysis, which is a type of genetic testing, reads through the letters of the book, looking for any spelling changes within the words. A different type of testing, which looks for large deletions and duplications in the DNA, is like having a missing or extra page or paragraph in the book. But then how do we do genetic testing, right? So genetic testing can be completed on different types of samples, including blood, saliva, cheek swab, or a tissue sample. Nowadays, sample collection kits are often sent to your home with instructions. Alternatively, doctors' offices and hospitals can still collect samples for testing. Now, to present some hypothetical case examples to put all of this information into practice. For our first example, please note this is a hypothetical situation of a patient we may see in genetic counseling for pediatric or rare disease. For this particular referral example, it is an 8-month-old female with suspected cerebral palsy. We meet with the parents and establish goals for the visit and reason for referral to genetics. Then we go on to complete the medical history intake, where we find out she was born at 32 weeks gestation due to premature labor. She had low muscle tone since birth. Due to the low muscle tone, she has developmental delays in her gross motor skills. She has tremors and is having increased stiffness in her limbs. And she hasn't had any prior imaging or genetic testing up until this point. So then we go on to family history questions. Again, this is a hypothetical example of a family history we may take. This is what a family history or pedigree looks like, drawn by the genetic counselors. Females are circles and males are squares. We can see in this family, our patient has a healthy older brother. There are common health issues in the family, such as high cholesterol, arthritis, and cancers at ages we would typically expect in the general population. Looking at this hypothetical pedigree, there is really no indication that our patient's symptoms may be due to something being passed down in the family. Next, we would talk about the genetic testing options based on the medical and family history. In this situation, the recommended test would be a genetic testing panel for cerebral palsy. This is a selection of multiple genes on one test, all having an association with cerebral palsy. Panels can range from a few genes to hundreds of genes. It's a broad test based on symptoms because we don't have an indication for one specific gene playing a role in her symptoms. We discussed how the testing works, including the type of technology and what the test is looking for. So this is a sequencing-based test, so looking for spelling changes in the DNA code in the genes that are tested. We then discussed possible test results and implications of the test results. The results come back completely normal. So no change identified in the genes tested compared to the general population. Alternatively, it could come back pathogenic or likely pathogenic, which is quote unquote abnormal, which means a change was found that is expected to alter gene function. Or lastly, an unknown result, which is technically called a variant of uncertain significance. And that happens when the lab identifies a genetic change in one of the genes that was tested that we know for sure is there. It's just not known at this time if it affects gene function or not. Unknown results are typically not actionable, meaning they do not typically change medical management. Next, we would review benefits and limitations of testing. Benefits could include identifying a genetic diagnosis and underlying reason for our patient's health history. This could include medical management changes and using that information to see if anybody else in the family has the same thing. Limitations could include not finding an answer or getting an unknown answer, which for some families can be quite confusing and or frustrating. Another thing that is typically discussed is future insurance considerations. So not as much in pediatrics as in adult genetics, but we discuss Gina, which is the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. Gina protects Americans from discrimination based on their genetic information in both health insurance and employment. However, it does not cover life insurance, disability, or long-term care insurance. Another topic that is discussed is the process of testing, as far as order placement, insurance coverage or self-pay options, sample collection and type of sample, as well as the expected turnaround time for results and how the results will be disclosed to the family. And then lastly, documentation of the session is sent to the family and likely also to the referring provider. In our hypothetical scenario, the family elected to pursue testing for their daughter, and approximately 3 to 4 weeks later, the results are available, which demonstrated 2 pathogenic variants in the DDC gene, which causes Aadc deficiency. This is an autosomal recessive condition, meaning both copies of the DDC gene would need to be non-functional in order to cause symptoms. Aadc deficiency is a condition that affects neurotransmitter metabolism and can cause symptoms of low muscle tone, abnormal muscle movements, also affecting the eyes, and also can cause developmental delays. There are medical management and treatment options available to help with symptoms, and other treatments are currently in development, and that is where PTC comes in. Additionally, since it's an autosomal recessive condition, it is possible parents are unaffected carriers for Aadc deficiency, which would warrant follow-up parental carrier testing for her parents. So all of this information is discussed with the family, and they hypothetically elected to pursue follow-up parental testing. In our example here, both parents underwent carrier testing for the DDC gene variants and were found to be carriers for Aadc deficiency. And this is indicated by the little dots on the pedigree. So when two reproductive partners are carriers for the same recessive condition, each of their pregnancies have a 25% chance to be affected with the condition. Since their son is 3 years old and not showing any symptoms, he is likely unaffected, and he may be a carrier for Aadc deficiency, for which carrier testing would be appropriate for him as an adult. Since both parents were identified to be carriers, their first-degree relatives, so parents and siblings, have up to a 50% chance to also be carriers. And as you can see here in this hypothetical example, the maternal grandmother was identified to be a carrier, as well as the paternal aunt. Testing other relatives for their carrier status may have implications for their reproductive decision-making, such as testing their reproductive partner and or postnatal testing of pregnancies. Here is another hypothetical medical history to demonstrate the genetic counseling process. In this example, we have a 6-year-old boy with spastic cerebral palsy. His mother meets with a genetic counselor to discuss the referral reason and establish the goals for the visit. During the medical history intake, we learned that he was born full term, had increased muscle tone as an infant. He currently has some minor developmental delays and has weakness in his legs. So once again, we do medical history and we go on to family history. This is again a hypothetical family history or pedigree. Females are circles and males are squares. The bracket around the father, so the second line up, indicates he was adopted. The P in the tilted square indicates a current pregnancy. We see that his siblings are generally healthy and nothing else majorly noteworthy in the family history that could potentially give us any information about his diagnosis of cerebral palsy or CP. As demonstrated with the previous case, we would discuss the recommended genetic testing. However, in this instance, a chromosomal microarray is recommended. This test is different than the testing recommended in the previous case example. The chromosomal microarray evaluates for DNA in a different way than the panels or sequencing-based tests. The chromosomal microarray, also called CMA, scans through all of the genetic material, again housed in chromosomes, looking for any extra or missing pieces of DNA, which we call deletions or duplications. This would be similar to looking for the missing or extra pages or paragraphs in the book analogy. If a deletion or duplication is found, we are able to determine what genes or information packets live in that deleted or duplicated region. And we do this because we know that if a person has a particular deletion or duplication, they may have a higher chance compared to the general population to have health or developmental concerns. We would discuss possible test results and the implications of the test results. So same as before, the possible test results could include negative or normal, pathogenic or likely pathogenic, or an unknown result. However, chromosomal microarrays can also reveal incidental findings, which are something that we're not necessarily looking for, but if it is identified, it may be important for medical management. And this happens because we are scanning through all of the genetic material looking for imbalances, the deletions or duplications. We would discuss benefits and limitations of testing, same as in the previous example, and also the future insurance considerations. Hypothetically, the family elected to pursue the chromosomal microarray, which returned with a 300 kilobase deletion at 2p22.3. So that is on chromosome number 2 at the address P22.3. And importantly, this includes the SPAST gene. The SPAST gene is associated with autosomal dominant spastic paraplegia type 4. Autosomal dominant means that having only one non-functioning copy of the gene is enough to cause symptoms. With autosomal dominant conditions, they can be brand new in an individual or they can be inherited from a parent. Although he was originally thought to have spastic cerebral palsy, there can be symptom overlap between CP and spastic paraplegia. This information was discussed with the family, and they hypothetically elected to pursue parental follow-up testing to see if the deletion was brand new in their son or inherited from a parent. In this instance, neither parent had symptoms of spastic paraplegia, so likely it was a new event in their son. Follow-up testing of both parents for the 2p22.3 deletion revealed that neither parent had the deletion, rather it was a new event in their son. This means that his siblings, including the mother's current pregnancy, is not an increased risk compared to the general population to also have the deletion. Since both parents were negative, additional family members, so their parents or siblings, is not indicated for the 2p22. However, going forward, our patient would have a 50% chance of passing down his deletion to each of his hypothetical. So that wraps up my presentation. If you are interested in discussing any of the information from this webinar, have concerns about your personal or family history, or have a different genetic question or concern, you can schedule a genetic counseling appointment by visiting genomedical.com or calling the telephone number on the screen. And thanks for your interest in our webinar. And now we will open it up for some questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Danielle. That was awesome. I will still ask, as we address the first few questions that came through the webinar, if you have a burning question and you want to make sure we get to it, feel free to still add to chat. Otherwise, we can open it up afterwards. So one awesome question that came in, and we apologize, we forgot this definition. AI is artificial intelligence. So sometimes that's like a smart technology. And so one of the ways that we use that at Genome Medical is that we have various technologies for certain patients who are coming through to see us, where they might interact with kind of like a web bot to get them to the right type of appointment. So it's not in lieu of seeing a personalized genetic counselor, but that might be one way that you interact with that technology. So I want to make sure we answered that for everyone. And then we had three really excellent questions. One was specific to cerebral palsy. So I thought we would make sure to get that one first. And then we can kind of go on. There's a couple really great general questions. So the first specific question was about the scenario that some patients with cerebral palsy are diagnosed or suspected to have that diagnosis based on a traumatic birth, such as low oxygen, and may or may not be related to a family history. And so how would you as a genetic counselor try to identify and sort those out, and what tools might families have to try to navigate that?
Yeah, so one of your tools would be a genetic counselor, because there are definitely scenarios or patients that we see where there is some type of environmental factor that happens that could be contributing to the cerebral palsy. So if there was a traumatic birth, or if there was a hypoxic injury to the brain and there is an abnormal brain MRI, and it's kind of deemed or figured out that the abnormal brain MRI findings likely explain the child's symptoms. That's one aspect of it. But if parents and providers feel like that may not be the entire story. Say, for instance, the child is severely affected and nothing really happened as far as a traumatic delivery, but there may be some minor changes on the brain MRI, but the brain MRI findings don't really correlate to the patient's severity. Then at that instance, it might be a situation where genetic testing would be considered. And so that's one of the tools, is talking to a genetic counselor, because we take all of that into consideration and we say, okay, well, does the history explain the brain MRI findings? And if not, should we consider genetic testing at that point?
Awesome. And I will add, and Allie, feel free to hop in as well, that specifically for PTC's interest in some of the genetic forms of that can kind of mimic cerebral palsy, like Aadc deficiency that we highlighted today, in trying to get testing available to as many people as possible. One avenue of kind of trying to sort that out is that patients who really don't fall into that kind of group of patients that have that traumatic brain injury or birth, might be eligible to have no cost testing that's being sponsored in an affiliation with PTC. And if they have, as Danielle pointed out, sometimes genetic testing is still helpful as a diagnosis of exclusion or identifying another cause. So I think part of our role as genetic counselors is being aware of all these wonderful options and making families feel like they are empowered to kind of, take advantage and use all of these options to get more information.
That's a great point, Natalie. Yeah, for those on the line from P2P, feel free, if there's families you think that may be interested in this program, to pursue genetic testing, have them, you can share my contact information, you can share Genome Medical's. We're always willing to have that conversation. It's a really nice program to ensure everybody has access to appropriate testing.
Awesome. Great. So, great. So then a couple more general questions that aren't specific to genetic causes of cerebral palsy, but I think are great questions. One question was, if a condition was determined to be new or spontaneous in the child and not inherited from a parent, would their siblings be at increased risk?
Great question. So we would estimate their risk to be probably around 1%. So we never say in genetics, never, and we never say recurrence risk is 0. So if it was a brand new change in the child or the kiddo, and we test both parents and neither of them have it, we would say the recurrence risk is probably tops around 1% for other siblings, and really no reason to test them unless they were to demonstrate symptoms. Reason for that being, and I'm going to get a little technical here, is it's possible that the germ cells, so the cells that are in the ovaries, so like eggs and sperm, could have that genetic variant, which you wouldn't detect if you were to draw a parent's blood or do a cheek swab. But there's really no way to test all the eggs or all of the sperm. So that's why we give the recurrence risk of about 1%.
Awesome. All right. And then there were a couple really awesome general questions. What would you recommend for a patient or a family who lives in an area without easy access to a genetics provider?
I would recommend telegenetics. So that's why we kind of exist. And even some genetic clinics that are in a main hub or big cities, sometimes they'll have outreach clinics to more rural areas. But I would say, particularly within the COVID-19 world, telehealth and particularly telegenetics has become more of a thing. And so with some companies, you can make your own appointment. With other companies, you need a doctor's referral. But usually we're able to do a lot of the genetic consultation minus a physical exam, obviously, through the telehealth option. And so we can do the genetic testing and do all the intake in that and all of that. And if need be, we can help kind of refer or get you in contact with an in-person genetic clinic.
Awesome. And I would add, I think Danielle and I are adding in the notes for the webinar that the National Society of Genetic Counselors also has a zip code finder. So in case you weren't aware of maybe one of those remote clinics that Danielle just mentioned, you might be able to reach out to your closest in-person location if you prefer an in-person appointment. But
May I speak up?
Oh, sure.
So my name is Anna. I work for a social services agency in Alaska. And we have just the hardest time keeping genetic counselors here. And we have a huge need for it. And so before COVID happened, we were desperately trying to entice genomics counselors up here. And then once COVID hit, it was, called the game. So now we're trying to come out of this, and now we've got this huge backlog of, kiddos and families who need these tests, and we don't know where to send them. We used to have every quarterly, somebody from Seattle would come up and do it, but they're not even doing that anymore. So we're kind of, in this huge desert of, genomics testing, and we really need some help.
Yeah. My easiest answer, and I'll let Danielle weigh in too, is selfishly a company like ours. So we can see patients and families from their homes in any of the 50 states because we are licensed across all of them. And the majority of the test kits these days are just shipped by routine USPS or FedEx to wherever the person lives. And they can usually do them at home, like the saliva spit kit or a swab. So that might be a potential solution for some of your families if they have phone or internet access.
Okay, so a lot of the rural areas do have phone access. They may not necessarily have video capability, but a lot of them, most of them do have some level of phone access.
Yeah, we do phone or Zoom based on family preference. So we try to cater to everybody, and our team keeps including more and more insurance plans. And so we have both insurance bill as well as self-pay. So there's a ton of options, and I can add my email to you in case you have more specific questions or like a larger partnership.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And then I think there was a related question. Sorry, I'm going through my list. There's so many good ones. One good question is, do genetic counselors provide care and information for patients and families beyond the initial testing or results phase?
Short answer is yes. I would need more specific questions about that. But usually after the result phase, and we give the result letter, the actual result report from the lab, and then a family letter. But if other family members, say siblings or cousins, were to get that family letter and they have any questions, usually they'll come back to the original genetic counselor that did the testing in the family. I've also tell people that I meet with that if you run across something on the internet that you have questions about, or if there's an opportunity that you saw on the internet for like a clinical trial or anything like that, to always email me. We're a continuous resource, and we will try to answer any questions that you have. So it's definitely not, one and done, you can never talk to us again. We're here to help with any resources and testing other family members and person to bounce information ideas off of.
And I would add also that depending on the practice that you see, some genetic counselors become part of like the medical home as well. So it might depend on like which hospital or group that you work with. But I think, as Ali mentioned before, she used one of my favorite phrases, like, we're in it for the long haul. We use that a lot as well.
This is Anna again. Can I also ask, when you mentioned partnerships, would you be willing to partner with like the local native hospital or something like that, so they could do like the physical exam, and then you guys could do the genetics counseling?
Yeah, definitely. We work with a lot of different groups for that exact thing. So I'm putting my email in the chat for everyone. But Anna, if you want to reach out specifically, I can kind of loop in some of our customer service folks so they could better address a specific partnership question.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then let me see. Oh, there's one question. Danielle, do you mind just repeating the Gina inclusions and exclusions?
Yep.
Cool.
So Gina specifically outlines coverage against discrimination based on your genetic makeup in health insurance and employment. However, there are some caveats regarding employment, and I would encourage you to look up Gina on the internet regarding that. But so like employers who have less than 15 employees, I think technically don't qualify for that. And then it also does not extend to the military. And then outside of that, it does not protect against life insurance or long-term or short-term disability insurance. So oftentimes if a person is completely asymptomatic, has no pre-existing condition, undergoing genetic testing based on a familial genetic variant or genetic condition, oftentimes we will discuss getting your life insurance policy in line before those test results come back, because hypothetically, if you test positive, that could be in your medical records, and some life insurance companies ask for medical records during enrollment. Not all of them do. Some of them will cover up to a certain amount, and then if you want higher, you'll have to submit records, but that's the general blanket statement, I would say. And if you have further questions about it, you can literally Google Gina, G-I-N-A, and get specifics on that.
I did also add the link to the chat as well, if you want to sneak that. And then I'll kind of pose this question generally and maybe a little bit more towards Aadc. So there was one treatment of muscular dystrophy that you had highlighted earlier. If you want to speak a little bit more to that and maybe what type of treatment, like if it was CRISPR-based or something else. And then if there were other, and I put this second part to you and Danielle, other rare diseases that people know of that have current treatments coming out.
That's a great question. And so in our pipeline, we do have two products. So Emflaza is a corticosteroid. It's a prednisone alternative for all Duchenne patients that fit the label. That's available in the US. And then we also have Adolurin. So Adolurin is an oral treatment for nonsense mutation, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So that subset of Duchenne, it is not CRISPR, it is not a gene therapy, it's just simply an oral sachet packet that's taken 3 times a day by the patients with Duchenne. And we are working on other gene therapy in our pipeline. So we have a couple other products coming up.
And I'll loop Natalie in on this as well, but as far as other conditions, a lot of retinal conditions have gene therapies coming out as well. The muscular dystrophies. What else am I missing, Natalie? Anything else you can think of?
So it's definitely growing by the day. So I think the safest thing is to always kind of stock clinicaltrials.org if you have a specific condition or gene of interest. But I know there are gene therapies for spinal muscular atrophy. I know sickle cell disease is moving along as well. And I think it's kind of becoming an exponential boom. So there's so many in development and we only sometimes hear about them once they're live. So I think that becomes like the bottleneck, so to speak.
That's a great point, Natalie. And if there's a specific disease you guys are interested in, I absolutely encourage you to contact. There's usually a disease-specific patient organization. So you want to have a close relationship with them, right? Because likely they're close with all the industry members working on potential treatments. And sometimes industry, it's a balance, right, between sharing where we are, because you don't want to give too much hope to the community if it's false hope, right? So you want to make sure that there's enough data to share and it's realistic. But patient advocacy groups could have more information, more news about industry partners, and more news from researchers. So definitely connect with those disease-specific groups.
Awesome. And then I do want to make sure we turn it back over to PTP for the last minute or two, but there was one last question that just came in about do counselors have a close relationship with social services for care options, which is an awesome question. And I'll let Danielle take that one and I can add if needed.
Yes, particularly in hospitals or in medical groups. We do work pretty closely with social services or other types of services that we can refer to them so our patients that we share get access to services that they need. That being said, I would also say that genetic counselors are really big advocates for our patients. And so if we need to get them in contact with some type of services, we will try our very hardest to do so. In the telehealth world, that is typically a lot of Googling and contacting people in the general area. But yes, we work with a lot of different other types of subspecialties to make sure that our patients are getting the comprehensive care and services that they need.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to turn it back over to you, Marcia, in case you had any wrap-up thoughts or anything else we could try to address.
No, I think this is really great. When I think of webinars, I think of a call to action, and I think people now have a resource to reach out to Aadc at PTC for patient advocacy, and you guys at Genome, I said Genome early, sorry, for future referrals. But also I put my email at P2P USA because there are people on this call that aren't from our network, that if they're seeking support from parent to parent, please reach out to me at member.info@p2pusa.org. And I'd hope that Danielle and Natalie and Allie, that you guys would also be sharing that with your clients. The great thing about P2P is if they have a rare genetic disorder, they don't have that peer match in their state, they have access to a national listserv that they can reach out, which is, it's really important. And it's something that, we're really prideful in having that access to the entire nation and not just a specific state. So thank you everybody for attending. This is being recorded. I will send it out either tomorrow or Monday with an evaluation and the links that Danielle and Natalie shared. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. And thanks PTC for sponsoring this event. It was really a great, based on the questions that you got, that's what's most important to me, is when people interact and they, obviously they're in the forefront working with families on the ground, if you will, or their families themselves. So this was really important, and it's great to see everybody. Stay healthy and see you soon.
Thanks so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
Nice meeting everyone.
Thank you.